All right. So, okay, I'm going to start now. Hello, everybody. I'm here with Natoya Raymond of the Liberty Bells Ladies for Philip Davies and the Women Against Feminism Facebook group, and also Richard Elliott, who is the absolute hero who funded by himself 7 screenings of the Red Pill in the UK. And he's absolutely awesome for doing that. And look at him in his red pill T-shirt. We are going to talk about an event that's going off for International Men's Day in London, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there are a whole bunch of speakers on the list, many of whom we all know. Let's see, I'm sure most of my audience is familiar with Dr. Randomer Mike Stevenson. Many
Yes.
many will know Neil Linden from his writings in the newspapers, Mike Buchannon from his appearances on various television media, and Steve Moxon from his lovely book, The Woman Racket. Um, Essentially, we're here to sort of get some more attention for the event, try and get people to attend, get some attention on it, and talk about the individual speakers and what they're going to be talking about. Without further ado, Natoya and Richard, take it away. Name a speaker, name a topic, and let's discuss it a little bit.
Okay. Do you want to go first, Richard?
Okay, well, I'd like to start with Will Stiles actually, because he's not a known MRA,
Hmm.
but he's been fighting a very, very interesting battle at Plymouth University. 2 years ago, he tried to launch a men's forum. They have a number of student forums, so they've got one for women, they've got one for disabled people, they've got one for students of colour. So he tried to launch a men's forum and was told basically he couldn't have one. And he appealed and he was told again he couldn't have one. And the reason they gave was that their equal opportunities policy doesn't apply to men because men aren't oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they completely missed the irony in that. We can't allow men to speak to each other
Yeah.
about each other because they're not oppressed enough or at all.
Well,
So he's going
the whole idea, they're not oppressed, even though the institutions, it's perfectly legal for the institutions to discriminate against them.
yeah, yeah. And it's not so much the university itself, it's actually the student union,
Yes, would be, yeah.
which is which is rife with identity politics and the radical end of feminism. And he was
And
really
they
quite
also don't
shocked.
like gay men now as well. Remember when the NUS said that gay men are now included in this policy?
In the list of the
Yeah,
privileged, you're too privileged to actually be considered marginalized in any way.
yeah.
Yeah.
So when you've got that progressive stack,
Yeah.
you know, male students at the bottom know you can't have a forum. So he's had his eyes opened and been red pilled by the process, and is coming to talk about that. And I think it's a very, very important area because it's at 18 to 20 where people start expressing their political opinions and throwing ideas around, and
Mm.
they're silencing the whole section. Um, and the corruption within the union itself needs to be addressed. And I'm very interested in working with students about this. So I'm really looking forward to him presenting.
I was actually wondering what the voter turnout is for student union elections in universities these days. Like I know that here in Canada, it's only that generally the highly politicized students that even bother to go out and vote for the student union reps. And so what you have, the problem that we have in Canada is that you have activist disciplines, and they aren't scholarly disciplines or academic disciplines, they're activist disciplines
Sure.
Mm.
within the humanities and the social sciences that that they convince the students to become highly polarized politically and very, very one-sided. I mean, the only there's something like 4 or 5 major schools of sociological thought, and the only one that's being used in Canada to any extent these days is critical or conflict theory.
Yeah.
So essentially, you have these students being activated politically, and then they go out and you could mute your mic if that works. There we go. But motherhood calls. But no,
Yeah.
you have this situation where these students are activated politically within their courses, and then they are the ones who are most motivated to decide or to put an effort into who actually gets to sit on the student union and make all of those decisions, right?
Sure. One of the things that interests me, though, is it's taken so long for this to come to the media attention.
Mm-hmm.
I graduated in 1992 in sociology and psychology, and the engineers were so fed up with the student union that they elected a spanner.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, that's 25 years ago, and this has just got worse since.
We actually had one group of an engineering department in Canada, I believe, discussing whether it would be possible to isolate the engineering department from the authority of the student union and elect their own separate student union.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Is it?
Sorry, I was going to say, I think there is a campaign in the UK to completely reject the NUS and just not recognise it as an official structure anymore. It's not very big, but there are some students that are trying to do that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hardly a legitimate body if it only if 80% of students aren't even voting in the student elections. Then it's not representative, and it's certainly not representative of the majority of students because they're completely apathetic.
Yeah, can I give you a little insight to my student days?
Sure.
I did media and culture studies and journalism, so hence why I became completely resistant to cultural Marxism. And I ran for VP Media, which is like one of the student presidents who does kind of promotional campaigns. And when I was doing that campaign, I had a very rigorous debate with a guy about why we needed a women's officer. And I said to him at the time, if you want to come to the AGM with me and put a motion forward for a men's officer, I will fully support you, because I was still quite ignorant about the realities of feminism back then. Yeah. Mm. And he chickened out last minute. And then when I went to the AGM, I mentioned it to someone and they were like, no, you can't do that. And I was like, what? Why not? And then they said, no, it would never go through. You're completely crazy. I didn't realize it at the time whatsoever. But if I'd have tried to do that, I might have been in a situation a little bit like Will, where I would have started a battle that I couldn't win. Mm-hmm. And if I remember rightly, it was about 12% turnout at the election that I lost, by the way.
There you go.
Yeah. So yeah, it's not representative. Most of the students don't care. I don't know. They're kind of, well, it's a kind of a microcosm of what's happening in general government, really. Although apart from things like Brexit, which had a huge turnout, in general election turnouts are not that big.
Well, the reason why Brexit had a huge turnout is because it was a single issue election or a referendum or a plebiscite or whatever, and it just it was essentially, like you had one question, people had strong opinions on it, and it was high stakes. It's very, very a very high stakes decision, right? And so there was very little apathy in that regard. But when there's a history of politicians in general being, well, I mean, in some ways they are the politicians we deserve, right? I mean, when you can nail down a politician on any question of policy, when you can actually nail him down, right, then his career is over. So then we wonder why. Why are they saying during the campaign all these vague things like, what are you for? I'm for change. Well, everybody's for change, right? What kind of change? Well, change. And it's just like the good kind of change. And they won't actually, you can't pin them down on a lot of these things. And then they go off and do whatever the fuck they want after they get in. So it's essentially, like we were all taught when I was in school, right, that in a representative democracy like Canada, you elect your politician brings your views to Parliament, right? When in reality, it is completely the opposite. It's everybody votes straight down party lines. It's a scandal almost when any politician breaks with the party line and votes against a bill that's been supported by the leader of their party. And it's like, so what does that have to do with my fucking views, right? Because even if I'm taking this candidate over the other as my MP, because I agree with him more than I agree with the other, that doesn't mean I agree with him on everything, and that doesn't mean the majority of constituents do either, or agree with the party that he's affiliated with. So it's just
that's why we started Ladies for Philip Davies, because he's the only MP in the UK who has voted for removal of some feminist-inspired policy. So he voted against the Istanbul Convention. He brought up an issue about the criminal justice gap between men and women.
Oh, I watched that. It was great. I watched him doing speech. That. Yeah.
And a couple of other more minor issues he's spoken out against. And he also, instigated a debate about men's issues in the House 2 years in a row. And I think that the only reason he can get away with doing that is because of the majority that he has in his constituency. But he is like a rare MP in terms of he does seem to actually care about some of these issues. And when the general election happened, I was trying to because you probably were aware of how when the general election got called, he got contested by Sophie Walker from the Women's Equality Party. She went for him specifically, even though she doesn't live in Shipley. She lives in Champagne Socialistville in London.
Didn't the Women's Equality Party just like crash and burn and fizzle into nothing after the last election?
Well, they still send me emails in their mailing list, but
well, I'm still I still get mail from the National Organization for Women because I was a member for a whole year. Because I attended one of their national conferences it was in just outside of Baltimore, in Maryland, and back in 2012. And when I did this at the behest of the president of the National Coalition for Men. And one of his friends sponsored my trip. He runs a group called Victims of Immigration Fraud, trying to get the domestic violence policies to do with immigration clawed back. Because right now, if you're a woman and you're a mail order bride, and you come to the United States and then you accuse your husband of hitting you, you get a green card right away. And you're fast-tracked for citizenship.
I did not know that.
Yeah, no, and now it's like they have actually online forums where there are people who will teach women from Eastern Europe, women from India, women from wherever, how to do this, right? It's the loopholes are that big and that exploitable, right? So anyhow, so they sent me down there because, in the words of Harry Crouch, the president of NCFM, you will not truly know the madness until you immerse yourself in it for an entire weekend. And
I agree with that.
So as part of signing up to attend this convention or this conference, I ended up being signed up involuntarily as a member of the National Organization for Women. And then they sent me every 3 months after that, after my membership expired, a reminder, renew your membership, renew your membership, renew your membership, right? And it was just like, yeah, but I don't like you ladies. You're all crazy. So
I think Harry Crouch is absolutely right. I mean, I've only recently come into men's rights in the last year since I started with the Red Pill,
Hmm.
and I've been following Jordan Peterson and others about the problems with cultural Marxism and postmodernism, and I've encountered radical feminism at work, which is pretty uncomfortable. But 2 weeks ago, I went to a seminar at the University of Bristol where they were debating whether or not to abolish masculinity. Because clearly it's just an idea, so you can get rid of it. And it was horrendous. They wouldn't even let me ask a question. I was there
What?
with,
No.
no, I had my hand up for an hour, and they went all round. Even the two women sat next to me thought, I must have the plague or something. But no,
Did
we'll
they
get
let
rid of.
Jordan ask one?
No,
Jordan's got
no.
a cute face.
They they are two men ask a question, and one of them was talking about this issue where men can't express their feelings. And so he said, well, he expressed his feelings because he'd met this girl and he was completely blown away. And, the two girls behind me just sniggered.
Yep.
I mean, it was really, really sad. And if you looked at the body language of the young men in the auditorium, they were cowed. They were ashamed. They just couldn't stand up to it. And I met a couple afterwards, and there was a lot of, male allies. I'm backing up my girlfriend. Well, you would, because that's a very rewarding thing to do.
And
So
it's a very
Until they
masculine
dump
thing
him.
to do.
yeah, I mean, it's masculine, it's sexually rewarding. So you're not going to challenge that narrative.
Yeah.
Can I
And
just
no,
jump in and give you another anecdote? When me and the Liberty Bells did that debate against Women's Equality Party and Tessa Munter, Lib Dem MP, there were 7 people that abstained from the vote. 5 of them were men, and there was hardly any men in there, so they basically made up like half of the men. And I just thought that was really telling, because they all kind of just looked like they really mostly didn't want to disagree, but they didn't agree either.
Yeah.
Like
they cannot come out, because it really is sort of, ever since we sort of integrated society, and I don't know whether this is ever going to change, but it has to change if we're actually going to have a gender integrated society to any real extent, is there is no way for a man to successfully compete with a woman. Because if he is victorious, he's an asshole oppressor who used his unearned privilege, to his advantage, and beat up on this poor woman, this poor oppressed fragile woman, right? Okay, so he's an asshole. And if she wins, then he's a loser. He's like a loser, and he's like worth nothing, and he's lost to a girl. And women enforce this every bit as much as men do, right?
Sure.
And so when you actually have men in this situation where where agreeing with the opposing opinion could be possibly construed as victimizing women, right? They're just gonna keep their mouth shut.
Yeah, totally.
It's a very high risk strategy with low reward.
Yeah.
For a man to oppose a feminist narrative. And there's another aspect at play. I went to see a psychologist called John Barry, who's just published a really interesting report today, in fact, about the state of masculinity, what's good about men. And he argues that men don't identify with each other as men. They'll identify as supporters of the same football team, or employers of the same business, or old boys of the same school. So they'll identify as members of an institution, even a trade union. They'll identify as steelworkers, but they don't identify with shared issues around men. So it's more difficult for them to mobilize and to organize, because they don't have that affinity.
Well,
and
then when you add to that this narrative that is so easy to gin up in, in the media, as far as when men do that, they are expressing hatred of women. They're trying to
Yeah,
take something from women. They're trying to victimize
yeah,
women in some way. They're not
yeah.
going to touch any of that stuff, right?
No.
They will occasionally. And one of the interesting things, because at least in the United States, circumcision is very culturally entrenched.
Yeah,
But you actually have men, a lot of men, and it's a very divided kind of issue, even among men, right? So I mean,
yeah,
there are plenty of
sure.
men who are pro circumcision and plenty of men who are anti, and but those men have actually been able to maintain, in some ways, a more stable kind of group affiliation, in order to advocate against circumcision, because there's really no, I mean, I guess at the most you're saying we should subject women to the sight of an uncircumcised penis, right? Or something like that. There's no argument that could really be taking anything away from women. There's no argument that it could really be victimizing women, in any way.
Sure.
And so they seem to be able to maintain a cohesive activist, thing, in terms of that single issue. But when it comes to divorce, alimony, child support, domestic violence, workplace harassment, sexual assault, right? All of these things that are seen as men versus women, men just absolutely have a difficult time getting together and advocating on their own behalf. So,
Well, I feel like
Yeah,
this is the right time to mention Mike Buchanan,
yes.
who's speaking. And everyone who knows you probably knows who Mike Buchanan is. But
Oh,
if
yeah.
you don't, he is the head of Justice for Men and Boys and the Women Who Love Them political party. Some people might say it's more of a pressure group than a political party, but you get certain benefits when you're a political party. So,
Yeah.
but his main focus now is circumcision.
Yeah.
And that's what he's going to be talking about. And I've been on a few protests with him in Luton, that wonderful place in the UK that Tommy Robinson loves so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it is interesting. When I went to the Women's March in January, the whole thing against Trump,
Oh God.
and they had that big rally in Trafalgar Square, it was huge. I went there with a few reporters from my mate who has like an alternative media channel, and we had lots of signage about circumcision, and we were just talking to random people, and I would say that 80% of them, they're all lefties that were there, they all agreed with us.
Yeah.
So I think it's an issue that has a lot of crossover politically, and generally, like, most, at least the ones that I've spoken to, especially the young girls, when I spoke to them about the issue, they were all in support of it being recognised as illegal, because Mike Buchanan's argument is that in the UK it is actually illegal, they don't enforce it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's also an argument that's been made for the United States, that between the moment female genital mutilation was outlawed in the U.S., male circumcision of minors, non-consenting minors, became de facto illegal because of equal protection laws, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is an unconstitutional thing to be done. And so there is an argument in the U.S. as well that it should be illegal. But Canada and the U.S., like Canada, not as much as the U.S. I think circumcision rates now are under 50% in Canada. In the U.S., they're still over 50%, I believe, and of newborns. And so essentially, it's still so culturally normalized that you would not have 80% of people agreeing with you, just in any gathering, agreeing with you that it should be made illegal. And you would actually have probably the majority of people saying that it like that you're an asshole for even talking about it, or even suggesting that it should be illegal.
But I think the UK might be able to have more of a grounding in it then, in that sense.
Yes.
In the USA, it seems to be insane. I have no idea why. I can't. Well, I do know why, but it's weird, isn't it, Richard? I don't know. You're quite into this issue as well, and in the UK, it's generally like most people I speak to, unless they are religious, go, "Oh no," and they all kind of shudder about it. So I don't know. I think Mike Buchanan's onto, if he keeps going with it. He could be onto a winner if he gets the right kind of support.
I think so. There's a couple of issues that I've come across with it. One of the reasons I'm interested in it is about the empathy gap.
Mm-hmm.
If we could start to look at the empathy gap with week-old babies.
Yeah, I know. Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah.
Before they become toxic and hairy and, all that. Maybe we can then work up through boys at primary school and work through the life cycle.
Yeah.
But one of the interesting things that I've discovered is when I've gone on to chats on Facebook about FGM, and all I've said is, wouldn't it be nice if the anti-FGM brigade worked with the anti-circumcision brigade and we looked at it as a single issue? And you just get a whole load of white knights saying, no, it's worse for girls. And I'm saying, yeah, but whether it's worse or not isn't an issue.
No,
it shouldn't happen at all.
Doesn't matter.
It's irrelevant.
Yeah.
Just don't cut bits off of babies.
No,
you don't.
They're more concerned with protecting girls than they are with boys. And, I try and get them to look at that.
Well, they see any, if both are seen as one issue, then that actually creates an equivalence between them. And when you're actually in a society, particularly, in the US, right, where it's not just legal, and it's not just practiced within religious communities, it's actually like it's a secular, thing in the US. When you draw that equivalency, what you are saying, sort of by extension, is that when girls are cut, it's not as bad as we think, right? Because if they're sort of similar enough to be treated as the same issue, then it's not that bad when girls are cut. So that's, I think, the reasoning there, right?
Okay.
So, but okay, who's next? It'll have to be you.
Richard, you go. I've got noise in the background.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'd like to mention Mark Pearson.
Yes.
You know about Mark?
Oh, I watched him speak at ICMI 16 about his adventure with the actress in the Waterloo subway station. Tube station.
He's just walking across the railway station platform, carrying his lunch in his bag, and is accused of sexual assault. And it's on video.
Yeah.
And it's on video that nothing happened. Mm-hmm. But because our beloved director of the Crime Prosecution Service, Alison Saunders, has to listen and believe as a matter of policy.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how strong the evidence is that he was innocent.
It must be pursued. It must be pursued
absolutely.
To the point where it can no longer be pursued.
Yeah. They've got to take it as far as they possibly can.
It's called a no-drop policy. They have them in some places, some states in the U.S. when it comes to domestic violence and sexual assaults, and that is to avoid. The justification for these policies, used at least in the States, were to avoid women who would then withdraw charges or would stop cooperating because they don't want their abuser to go to prison, or maybe they're intimidated by him, or
they're just intimidated by the process itself.
Yeah.
So there's no criticism that it was just too difficult to do. That's why victims withdraw. But, it's completely changed his life.
Yeah.
It's opened his eyes massively to what, thousands of men face every year.
Yeah.
And he's mounting a fundraiser to campaign.
Oh,
to
good.
take the police to court for their behaviour.
Good.
And we're hoping that we can use the conference to get some more support for that.
Oh, that's
Because
good.
again, it's one of these things where men fight shy of it until it happens to them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only when we reach a critical mass of people who've been affected by it
Yeah.
that I think men are going to start to say, well, enough is enough. And I've just watched this evening Diana Davison's video on what's happening with the nightclub scene in Vancouver,
Oh, I haven't had a chance
where
to watch that yet.
well, basically what's happening is the club going DJs of Vancouver have launched an anonymous shit list of men who grope women in clubs, and one guy's already committed suicide because of the accusation, and they're phoning their employers, and it's done completely anonymously with no evidence. And I'm very much afraid that this will follow the Me Too. It followed from the Me Too, but this is Me Too version 2
Yeah.
of anonymous shit lists and naming and shaming with no evidence.
Yeah.
And
No,
it is a mob mentality.
well, one of the things that's so frustrating about this, and I think Marie Hennen, who was the defense attorney for Jian Ghomeshi here in Canada, I don't know if you heard about that case. If you watched Diana Davison, I'm sure you would have. But and she has plenty of interesting things to say about it for sure. But Marie Hennen said, when you get rid of due process, it never ends well for marginalized men.
No.
Right? It never ends well for men of color. It never ends well for men who are part of religious minorities. It never ends well for gay men, bisexual men, trans women, trans men. It never ends well for any of those people. Or Aboriginal men. Remove due process with care. Your war against the white man, right? Even if you feel you're justified, even if I were to agree that you have a war against the white man and that this is justified, what you are creating is a system in which it is mostly marginalized men who will be caught in the crossfire. They're going to be fragged by their own. I mean, and if you're an intersectional feminist, this should be a concern of yours.
But it's a drive to conformity, and so whenever there's a mob rule to conform, the marginalized and the different and the unusual will suffer the most, because they're taking out the ends of that curve, and we want everyone to be in this block and behave this way.
Yeah.
So if you're on the ends of the spectrum anyway, that doubles your problem. And I think you're absolutely right. The intersectional feminists should take note of that, but it's got that femme bit in the name, so it's unlikely that that'll be their first port of call.
There you go. Here, let me. She just dropped. I'm just going to. You can click the phone thingy to rejoin. Upper right corner. Okay. Or it'll say join call or whatever. So, but just because I don't want to lose her for good.
No, sure.
But she seems to be needing to go tend to something. So, she just dropped out because it's her internet. So.
Okay.
All right. So it's up to you and me.
Okay.
And me.
Well, another character that you're probably familiar with, Dr. Randa McCann. Mike Stevens.
Yes.
He's coming along. He's done a recent video which made some very good points in relation to the suicide issue, and this whole idea that the reason men commit suicide is because they can't talk about their feelings and they're trained out of it when they're young. But his point is that men are trained out of it. They're being trained into keeping quiet and being taught that no one actually cares how they feel.
Yeah.
It's they're being almost groomed into silence, because they'll discover later in life, if they say, I feel scared, or I feel hurt, or I feel sad, it's not going to work out well for them. So it's in their best interest to keep quiet.
Well, it's in
And
their
he's going to
best.
be,
It's in their best interest to learn how to manage those emotions and
yeah,
build up calluses when they're young.
yeah,
And what we're doing, I think, and I've said this before too, is what we're doing when we raise boys to to believe that their feelings matter every bit as much as girls do, and it's okay to cry and it's okay to do all of these things, and then they hit their teens, they their Adam's apple pops out, their voice cracks, they sprout a little facial hair, and all of a sudden the male tears coffee mugs come out, and they're not
yeah.
prepared at all, right?
No,
So
no. And he's going to be talking about why men, because as a comedian,
mhm.
he's going to be talking about why men are funny
Yeah,
but not happy. And it's a very common trait with comedians that there's the shadow side of being funny in front of other people, trying to cheer people up and denying your own depression. I mean, Robbie Williams is probably a classic example of that, one of the funniest men ever,
yeah,
and yet a deeply tragic personal life. And so Mike's going to be looking at that issue obviously from his personal experience as a comedian and being a man, and how difficult it is to be wholly authentic, because people don't actually want to know, or
yeah,
they don't like when a man expresses his feelings and people don't like what they feel. That's even worse,
yeah.
you
Mm.
know.
Well, and I think that there are some cutting edge comedians out there. Bill Burr he was brilliant about this right up until his last comedy special, which he married a feminist a while ago, and you can tell. But and Mark Maron was another one who was just sort of that. He's just like a gnarled ball of existential angst and self doubt, and yet he was quite funny in terms of being able to sort of mock that and make fun of that and make a joke out of that on stage. And I think that it's fine when men can be truth tellers in their comedy in that way, right? But that's not that's not going to get them sympathy. It gets them laughs, right? And people
Yeah.
say it's funny because it's true, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily get them sympathy for it. It doesn't necessarily make people see them as human beings worthy of compassion. It's just like, we're gonna laugh at it because it's funny because it's true. Oh well, and then they go home and go to bed, right? And so, I mean, on the one hand, I do like the idea of men using comedy to explore a lot of these dark things, but on the other hand, that doesn't it all of the family court jokes in the world aren't going to change the family courts.
No.
Yeah.
So and all
But
of the circumcision jokes on the part of Joe Rogan, right? And Joe Rogan had this beautiful, beautiful bit where he said his wife was pregnant, and she said, if it's a boy, we're going to have him circumcised. And he says, hell no, we're not. And she says, oh my God, I don't want to look at that. I mean, like, what woman wants to look at the ew? It's just gross. Like, an uncircumcised penis is just gross. And he's like, how dare you? I lick your asshole. And, how dare you judge anybody's penis, right?
Yeah,
He's like,
yeah.
have you ever squatted over a mirror and taken a look at what you're packing down there? Because it's like the predator's mouth, right? And so it's like, how dare you criticize men for what their penises look like, right? So, I mean, that was actually really amusing. And, but it's not going to stop babies from being circumcised either. It's not going to
No.
make it illegal. So...
I think that Mike needs to be presented in front of more live people. I'm sure he wants to do that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. I think
He does.
so.
He's such an underrated talent.